I think we're going to get started. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar, which is launching our non-chemical Bracken Management Learning Network. So what we're going to talk through today, we've got a couple of brilliant farmers here that you should be able to see on the screen in Fiona and Diarmid, and they're going to talk about field labs that they are currently part of on this topic of non-chemical Bracken management. So I'll run through a quick introduction of innovative farmers for those of you on the call that haven't come across us before, and an introduction to these two learning networks. And then after we've got a really good feel of it and looked at lots of brilliant pictures from the farms, we will then just kind of touch a little bit on what we're trying to do with the learning network and what the next steps are. So just a little bit of housekeeping. You should be able to see on your controls on your screen that there's a Q&A option. Please do use that for your questions because it allows other people on the webinar to upvote them. So if it means that we don't have all separate questions, you can just upvote ones that are what you wanted to ask as well. And that'll just make it slightly easier to get questions answered when we get to that point. But you can put your questions in all the way through. I'll stop after Fiona's presentation and then stop again after Diarmid so we can get things answered then. See, numbers are creeping up really well, so that's brilliant. Move the slides. Here we go. So Innovative Farmers is a funding stream that we manage within Soil Association, and the key thing of it is it's really about farmer-led research and on-farm trials. So the topics that we look at under what we call field labs are all issues and items to explore that come to us from farmers and things that come up on farm for them. We then match them with a facilitator and researcher to try and get some really good practical knowledge out of that. Admittedly, it's not always perfect science, which I know some of us would like it to be, but it means that we're aiming for that real practical advice that people can move stuff forward with. And if something more kind of very detailed scientific can come out of it, great. But it's a lot about achieving it and that practical outcome. So over the years that we've been running into farmers, we have had over 150 of those field labs, and that's included over 750 trialists. So lots of them have multiple farms involved. And we've worked with over 40 different research organisations on that as well. So the two field labs that we're going to talk about today in terms of non-chemical Bracken management have very similar aims. So we've been working towards the same aims for both of them. The first one is expand knowledge on different methods of managing Bracken without chemicals, but we've started with a livestock one, which was comparing to no management. So we've got a control area, and in some cases on farms we're doing it with mechanical management as well. And then Diarmid's here as he was like an add-on field lab where he's just looking at the mechanical management, but the aims and stuff of the projects are all the same. So alongside that management aspect, there's also the impacts on biodiversity. So for a lot of us, it's not as simple as just eradicating something or keeping it, that there is a lot of beneficial habitat available around the edges of the Bracken, which support lots of different species. So we don't necessarily want to be wiping it out of existence, but we do want to make sure that it's not continuing to encroach on grazing land, or it's not becoming a dense monoculture that nothing else can be involved in. It's really that edge habitat that's got lots of biodiversity benefits. So that's heavily being considered within the projects. We're looking at the effects of the management methods that we use on soil health and structure. Unfortunately, because of the length of time that we often have the field labs and stuff, we may not see any major changes here, but we've got the baseline and we can start moving through. And if we have the opportunity to extend projects or review stuff in future, we have that number to go back to. So it was one of those things, if we didn't start with a short-term project of 2 to 3 years, then we would never get started. We would never find the opportunity to do something longer. And the really important thing, and this is an aim of basically all of the field labs, is to provide that informed and supported knowledge sharing opportunities to farmers afterwards. So through the process of the field lab, and as an outcome of it, is often kind of either fact sheets or practical advice that people can take away to change practice on farm. So again, both field labs are following a very similar design in terms of the surveys and assessments that we're carrying out. And the majority of these assessments are being done by the farmers involved in the field labs. So we did a nice training day to get that kind of upskilling, make sure everybody was confident in what they were delivering. So the only one of these that's been delivered by anybody else is biodiversity surveys, just because on a timing basis to be able to educate everybody, not everybody wants to do it, but as a group, we've all had a lot of interest, but we've got a great ecologist that has been part of this project that is doing a consistent survey across all of the farms. But we're doing bracken measurements, so we're looking at the height and the density of the bracken. We're looking at biodiversity, and both of those are being done every year on both the control and the management sites. We're doing a visual assessment of soil structure. That's been done in the first year and the final year. The same as the soil sampling, which is included. It's the carbon check option, so we're looking at the carbon as well. We're doing fixed point photography. Sorry, I'm going to cough. Fixed point photography, so we've got little cradles on all of the farms, and it just allows us to get that really good visual of how the site is changing, and whether that's year on year or when livestock or the treatment has gone in and out, we can see that kind of visual change. And then at the end of it, we are hoping to also deliver a bit of a management cost benefit. A lot of the stuff that the outcomes of both these field labs and the overall learning network, which we'll talk a little bit more at the end, is to be able to provide a decision-making tool to help that you can weigh up what you're trying to achieve, what your outcome that you want that to be, whether it's about biodiversity, whether it's about clearance for the next stage, or whether that's trees or whatever it is. But the costs, the kind of everything that factors into that, so you can have something that supports you to make the best decision for your farm and for your individual situation. So the first field lab, which started a couple of years ago, and this was started and it has been co-funded through Pasture for Life, through a FIPL project that they've ran. Sorry, that's Farming and Protected Landscapes project that has been ran and is still going in the north of England, Pasture for Profit North. There is a Pasture for Profit South. But they co-funded this field lab, so that's alongside Innovative Farmers, and they've Rob Bunn for Pasture for Life has helped coordinate it. And we've got Robin Pakeman from the James Hutton Institute as the researcher. So the little map on the side there is kind of Northwest Farms, and that's the location of the 8 farms that have been part of the trial. So I'm now going to pass you over to Fiona Daley, who's on the call, who's one of those farms and has been doing lots of bracken management for a long time, to talk through her experience and how she got into it. So over to you, Fiona.
Thanks, Tabitha. So hello everyone, my name's Fiona Daley and I farm 150 acres of land with my husband David Daley at Hodge Hill Farm, Cartmel Fell, which is on the Lake District Low Fells. I'm going to talk through our work with Innovative Farmers and how we manage our brackens using a low input agricultural system and a herd of belted Galloways. This slide shows our brackens back in 2017. These brackens were once an important resource to this farm when they were used for winter bedding. They were mown by hand once every 5 years, and over many generations this kept the brackens under control. The practice stopped about 70 years ago owing to a lack of people on farm to undertake the work. Alternative bedding material became available, such as straw, which was cheaper and readily transportable to the uplands, and the increased availability of herbicides making chemical eradication possible. Post-war farming practices certainly improved the food production capacity of this type of land by removing the brackens, but we don't really know what we've lost in the process. David and I previously farmed on a conventional basis using Swaledale sheep and Limousin cattle. By conventional, I mean the practice which includes the routine use of chemical fertilisers and wormers, relatively high stocking densities and continental breeds of cattle, none of which made any impact on our brackens. We made the change to belted Galloways in 2017, and the next slide shows them after they've been 6 months on our land. Using a pasture-fed system means that they only get fed grass, hay, or other natural forage such as tree leaves. We don't use chemical fertilisers or routinely treat the cattle with chemicals. The brackens are the perfect environment for the belties. They can stay out all year, and the bracken beds can be up to 10 degrees warmer than the rest of the ground, so great for sleeping on. Where the brackens are most dense, there's little incentive for the cattle to wander, so we broadcast leaves of hay to tempt them into new areas. Initially, this was all done by hand, and it was hard work. And I think if we can have the next slide, it shows Dave carrying out the hay by hand. But now that we've opened up the brackens, we can get out to them on a 4x4, although we still need to do some feeding on foot. We broadcast the hay in the winter and in the early spring to spread the grass seed. We also distribute salt and mineral licks to encourage the cattle to explore. These are placed in elevated feeders so to avoid contact with badgers and reduce the potential risk for the spread of TB. Once the cattle has begun to open out the areas by crushing the brackens underfoot, the plug holes made by their feet also create pockets in which grass and other plant seeds can germinate. Gradually, the grass establishes itself beneath the brackens, eventually pushing the brackens back to areas around outcrops of rock or other less accessible areas such as steep slopes, creating a mosaic or patchwork that's ideal for invertebrates. Other species return or spread. If we could have the next slide, please. So this slide shows the banks of self-seeded violets and primroses, which are good for the high brown fritillary and the Duke of Burgundy butterflies. The other advantage of a low input, low chemical based system is the return of the dung beetles, which are an important species for soil health and regeneration. And we regularly check dung packs for beetles, something which the many visitors to the farm find both revolting and fascinating in equal measure. So for 8 years, with the help of the belties, we've moved from a blanket of impenetrable brackens to a mosaic, including open grassy areas, glades and pathways. In our view, the land is more productive because there's more grass. It's ecologically more diverse and we have a broader range of habitats, and the farm's more profitable because the grass-fed cattle attract a premium price and our input costs are lower. But that's just our view. Next slide, please. So where Innovative Farmers comes in is to try to measure some of the outcomes. This is a longitudinal project, which means we're measuring the impact over a number of years. And we have 3 sites. Firstly, the control site, where the livestock are excluded by virtual fence collars. Secondly, the cattle-only site, which this is a picture of, where we broadcast feed in this area, but we don't use machinery. If we can see the next slide. That's the same area in the winter with the broadcast feeding. And then thirdly, we've got the cattle and mechanical control area, where we broadcast feed and we also pasture top at least once per year, sometimes twice. Generally, we do this late August, so the brackens don't have time to recover before the growing season finishes, and they're not able to put energy back in the ground. We've tried more frequent cutting in other areas, but in our trial site, we're limiting it to cutting once or twice a year. The next slide shows where we're up to with the mechanical. Oh, no, it doesn't. It shows the field labs. So through the field labs, we're adding to the evidence base to understand the options for managing brackens without chemicals. We're one of 8 farms in the project, and we're all taking different approaches. This is because our land, our farming practice, and our size and scale and our range of livestock are all different. At Hodge Hill, we want to understand the effect of what we're doing on biodiversity, carbon sequestration, and food production capacity. Over the last 15 months, we've measured the height and density of the brackens twice. We've undertaken a baseline soil survey and 2 annual biodiversity surveys. Our observations are the most progress is where we're using cattle and mechanical means to control the brackens. Here the brackens are much shorter, but in the early stages there are more individual fronds than elsewhere. These shorter fronds appear to allow the light through to the soil and into the belted Galloway-created divots. The grass and other plants, including self-set trees, have started to re-establish. Next slide, please. So here you see how the brackens are weakened. In our test sites, there is yet no significant difference in the density of the brackens between the control area and the cattle-only area. But the height of the brackens definitely appears lower in the cattle-only area, perhaps suggesting the cattle are gradually weakening the plants. So it's early days, but we're expecting it to be slower than in the mechanical area as we try to reverse 70 years of dominance by the brackens. In 2025, we observed that the height of our brackens was lower across all 3 sites. They also started to die back much earlier due to the hot, dry weather, and this suggests that the climate has an impact on the vigour of the brackens. There's clearly a greater diversity of species in the areas where we've been able to create a mosaic of brackens and grass through the cattle and mechanical management. Almost 60 different species of flora, birds and invertebrates were identified, including a small increase year on year from the 2 surveys that were undertaken. But again, it will take time to establish this as a positive trend. Next photo, please. So this is the area that you saw where the cattle had just been introduced back in 2017. From our own observations and practice, it's clear that a combination of broadcast feeding and mowing has been the quickest way to control the bracken on our land. At Hodge Hill, we can see with our own eyes that what's been achieved over the 8 years. The field labs are obviously at their early stages of collecting and collating the evidence, which will enable us to quantify the impact of the change on the soil health and biodiversity. It will also give us lots of evidence about what works best in what setting. The results from the differing approaches in the different farms might suggest even more effective ways, and here at Hodge Hill, we're ready as ever to learn from others. So my final photo is of the mosaic, and that is what we are trying to achieve. This is now reasonably stable, with the cattle doing most of the work at a level of 4 livestock units per hectare. I hope this information and the Innovative Farmers Project will inspire you to think about what might work for you when managing brackens and what outcomes you want to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. I was just having a quick check to see, sorry, the sun's right in my face now, what the questions were, but the majority of questions are about the webinar crashing. So again, apologies for that, everybody. We do have a couple others. I'm just seeing whether they specific for yours. So the first one, Fiona, we've had a suggestion in the past that tick pressure from bracken have been linked with heifer failing to get in calf. What is the tick pressure like in your area? Has management affected breeding success?
So we haven't had a problem. Our cattle are tick acclimatised. So whilst they do have ticks, it doesn't affect them. We've also been warned about bracken poisoning, but we haven't had any trouble with that. I think if there's enough open space for them to graze, then I think they've got the choice of wandering in and out of the brackens, and I think that helps them to manage their health. Obviously, if they're just in dense brackens, then I think the tick pressure and the poisoning pressure can be slightly worse.
That's great, Fiona, and that does bring on to one of the other questions, was about the risk of bracken poisoning. So it's something that we're very aware of, and obviously we don't want to put any livestock at risk when we're doing these projects. There is a technical note available on the website if anybody wants to look at it, that has been done by a local vet practice, which is a bit of a literature review about the kind of the risks involved in bracken poisoning. But essentially, as Fiona said, the key things for reducing any risk is about making sure that they're not encouraged to feed on it. So it's having plenty of other feed sources available, which obviously we would always encourage from an animal health point of view anyway, but having either plenty of grass available or kind of alternative fodder. What seems to be I wouldn't say pattern, but there seems to be the thing with bracken poisoning is that you get individual animals that are particularly keen to eat it, which is kind of hard to identify why that individual has been keen. But often when you see poisoning cases, it has been one animal within the herd that has been inclined to eat a poisonous plant. But as any of the farmers on the call will be aware, you often get animals like that have just a tendency to do something you don't want them to do. So a couple more questions that have come up for you now since we've got to this bit. Oh, suddenly a lot of questions, sorry. Do you find that there is an optimum time of year to break trample the bracken fronds, e.g. early summer or autumn? So just in terms of your farm, Fiona, is that something you've seen?
Yeah, so we started mowing them early to sort of keep on top of them, but they always got away on us. So we've now resorted to mowing them in late August because, as I say, I think it stops them being able to regrow before the season ends, and it stops them being able to put nutrients back in the ground. So whilst you can mow 5-6 times a year, it seems a waste of effort to us. Do it the once or the twice in August time, and that has the absolute most impact for the least effort.
Great. We'll do one more question now, and then we'll come back to some of the others a little bit later. But the next question was about the biodiversity survey, and you've obviously been there with Beth when she's been carrying it out. What has she been looking for?
She's been looking at the variety of herbage in there, and that's really important to us as well, because we want the animals to have not just grass, but all sorts of other things to eat. So she's finding, 40, 50 different forms of flora in the grass, which is great. But she's also looking at the bird life, and she's looking at the invertebrates as well. And we've got a really good spread, and we're pleased about that. She's looking in the areas in the test areas, but as you can see, we've already started to manage the plot much more widely. So I think we've got more biodiversity in some of the areas that she's not currently looking at, but she's very focused on the test sites, obviously. So it feels to me like it's good news, but we have to wait for the results.
Great, thank you. So just a couple of questions. I see there's quite a lot of questions coming through about the animal health side of things. I think this is something that we'll do another webinar on. I've got a colleague at APHA who's their veterinary toxicologist, who is very happy to come along and talk to us as well. And as where that kind of poisoning cases get recorded too, particularly from England and Wales. So we'll kind of take some of them. We will share the document that I just mentioned that's on the website as the follow-up, and we will do a webinar focused on that question, because I know it's a worry for a lot of people, both cattle, and there is a risk with pigs and stuff as well. The other thing that a lot of the questions are coming up is about kind of livestock density, or the kind of how much kind of how much pressure we need to be putting on, how much we need over particular hectareages and stuff. And as Diarmid and I discussed recently, that is one of the things that we don't know yet. So we might be able to pull it out a little bit at the end of the trial when we can compare farm to farm and see kind of what the different systems are. But that could well be the question that we take forward with the expanded learning network, with the expanded opportunity for research, is what is that density that's critical, kind of what's the critical mass. So I have seen your questions. Thank you very much for sending them in. We'll come back to a few questions after the next little bits of the presentation. But some of those things we don't have the answers to yet. I am very pleased that you're asking them. So I just wanted to talk a little bit further about that trial that Fiona's been part of and what they're doing. So in terms of year one, we did the baseline surveys, the soil samples. So like I said, we did these year one, we're going to do them in the final year. So we did process 15 samples over the field lab. The average organic carbon stock was 152.4 tonnes per hectare, and the highest soil organic carbon that we saw across the farms involved was 9.9%. As I mentioned at the top, we're not sure whether we will see, or we're unlikely to see a huge difference over a 2 or 3 year period, but we wanted that baseline so that we have it so we can kind of look forward. We've always got that to come back to. However, in terms of the Bracken measurements, we have seen considerable impact just with 2 years of management. So the average numbers that you can see in the 2 blue bubbles here are across all of the sites. They're across the control and the management sites in that first year. So before anything had been done, we did the baseline surveys. So you can see for the density, the average density across all of the sites was 30.2 stems per metre squared. And then on the management sites in year 2, so that's after 2 years of management, that has dropped down to 20.8 stems per metre squared. So it is the average. Obviously, Fiona mentioned that they hadn't noticeably seen a lot of density change, but as come on to next, they had seen quite a lot of height change. So again, across all of the sites in that first year, the average was 90.7 centimetres tall. And after the 2 years of management, we dropped down to just over 50 centimetres tall. Now, obviously, that is an average. There was quite a variety. In some of the sites, there's nothing. And some of the sites, the highest bracken that we saw this year, so it wasn't in the first year, this was the number from this year was the highest bracken over the whole project, is 2.2 metres. So if you can imagine, if any of you haven't come across these really dense, big stands of bracken, 2.2 metres at 30 stems per metre squared is a really imposing site, and that's kind of demonstrates how you're not getting the light down to the soil there. It's creating a really dense litter because as those fronds break down in the winter and stuff, they're sitting on top of the soil and things, so nothing is getting that opportunity. And it's one of the way that the disruption with the cattle, it's just bringing in that competition and it's giving that opportunity, there's light getting down to the soil again. So I did work it out a slightly different way, or not a different way, but produced it in a different way. Just looking on that year-on-year difference, as Fiona said, for some of the sites, even on the controls, they saw a difference just with the different weather that we've experienced. So I just wanted to check that reduction and see how much of it was year-on-year. So you can see in that yellow table at the top that in terms of the density, we saw no reduction in density year-on-year in the control sites. So there wasn't a weather impact necessarily on the density of the stems, which follows what Fiona said. However, we saw a 34% reduction on the management sites. So that's fab. So we can kind of be very happy that that reduction has been due to the management. Similar with the height, we did see a slight reduction in the height, as Fiona mentioned, year-on-year of 3.2%, which is understandable. However, thankfully, or I'm very pleased to say, that we saw 41.7% on the management sites. So even if we minus that 3.2 from it, we are still seeing a considerable reduction in height of the bracken due to the management. So I've got here, hopefully they will play nicely with the internet access that I have, that this is some of the videos from one of our other trialists in the livestock project is using pigs. So this is quite when they've gone into a site quite early, and they've actually been using pig nuts to encourage them into the site. So that's what they're excitedly rummaging around for. And the next video, this is the same of hill a couple of months later. So they're using smaller pig nut or smaller kind of pig feed at this point, but you can see that there has been a dramatic difference of the cover and how much has been there. And obviously we'll look at this again next year to see what the regrowth has been, to see what the kind of permanent damage has been, or whether they've just disrupted it at the time. But this is one of the reasons that pigs are considered very effective, that once they get into the rooting around in a space, so they'll have eaten the food that's available, but they then turn up the soil. So in that similar way, they're exposing it, they're getting other seeds exposed, and they're also exposing some of those rhizomes from the bracken, which then they end up getting damaged either through weather or exposure. So that is one of the ways that the pigs make a big difference. So I'm just about to hand over to Diarmid for our second field lab, which I have aware that I'd edited this and I've not opened the right one because it says field lab. It's not what I mean. So I'm sorry about that as well. But so Diarmid's based up just north of Dundee, and he's, like I mentioned, an add-on to this project because he's got a particular mechanical focus. So Diarmid, I will hand over you to explain what you've been up to.
Hi folks, firstly can I apologise for 50% of my voice still reverberating around Hampton, and secondly, if I break out into fits of laughter or tears, it's because on the TV beside me I'm watching the highlights package. The introduction for us is, my name's Diarmid Baird. I farm here with my two brothers at Scotstoun, north of Dundee, and my parents. They purchased the farm in 1976. It is about 450 acres of arable at 600 feet, and it rises to the top of the hill ground at 1,000 feet. In 2020, we purchased the neighbouring farm, and it's about 150 acres of arable and about 450 acres of hill ground, all of which has been abandoned for the last 40 years, half of which is a SSSI, and the other half is the area that you'll see in the pictures today. And the intention for that section of ground, that 200 acres, is a continuous cover native woodland. So the idea about all of this bracken research is to understand how we can just suppress the bracken enough that we can get the trees to grow. The second point I want to make before we start is that I am fundamentally an engineer, not a farmer. I am practicing at farming, I'm learning about farming, and I have been doing for the last 10 or 15 years, and I've taken a particular interest in regenerative farming. The whole of our farm is organic. So I started to look at ideas of no-till farming and how you do that organically. It was very tricky. And that's where the idea of a crimper roller came from, which is a method used in America for suppressing cover crops of rye, predominantly 5 feet tall, with a roller on the front, and they plant soybeans in behind. And I looked at that and wondered whether that could be applied in this scenario. So the slide you see in front of you is the first go in 2022. This is August. And I've got the front press that we normally put on the front of the tractor before we tow the seeder behind. And its job is just to compact the ground. And it's got, you can just see the little nicket rollers that have got little teeth on them. And I put this on the back of an ordinary tractor and went for a wander in this bit of hill. And you can see the brackens 4 feet tall. So I don't really know where I'm driving. And I'm a little bit scared, so I'm going very slowly. And you can see in the inset picture that the stems have been crimped. So they've not been cut, but they have been bruised. And you can just see that in no more, but it's not that particular uniform. So it suggested that I was on the right path, but the right tool for the right job would be useful. So in the next slide, we get the crimper roller built. So this is using blueprints which are freely available from the Organic Rodale Institute in America, and they use it for crimping rye. And it's a very simple piece of machinery. It is a 3-meter wide piece of pipe with metal bars on it. The bars are not sharp, and the idea is that it walks down the stems as it rolls. And you can see in the photograph, if you just look closely, you can see each little bruise is about 100 mil, 4 inches, as it walks up the stem. And it's that is key to making this work. The exact method of how that works, I still haven't read about it yet. But the nice folks at the Hutton Institute are looking at it and hopefully going to do some research on it. The theory is that it damages the vascular system of the plant, and that confuses it, and it doesn't know how to reconnect with the underground rhizome, which is the difference between when you cut it, and I'll show what happens when you cut it. That cutting encourages it, whereas bruising seems to leave it just baffled, and a baffled plant is useful for what we're doing. So these plants were crimped in June 2023. So we go to the next slide. We can see this is August 2023 in the main picture. And so you've got majority of plants are dead, but you've got a decent recovery there from a June roll. And then if we look to the inset picture, that's from October. And there is an obligation for spaniels in a number of pictures. I don't really know why, but they seem to be useful as part of this research project. This slide is from June 2024. So yes, this one. So if you look, the main picture, that's me having done that area with the crimper roller on a rubber tired tractor the previous year in June. Just one roll, and you can see how the grass is now really, really strong. The density of the bracken is vastly reduced. And the wee close-up in the inset just shows that a wee bit tighter. The other little key thing is that the leaf litter seems to disappear over winter. So when this comes back and it starts growing, we get a far higher proportion of grasses growing, which helps folks like Fiona to have the cattle want to go there and they want to munch something. So it's just to be noted that that's a very useful consequence of what we're doing. So this was from June 2024, and we go to the next one. We can see a video of it working, I think. A jerky video, but a video nonetheless. But it's just a very simple kit. So okay. Now you can see in the video now what we've done is attached it to a crawler tractor so that I can access ground that otherwise would not be available. So this is having used the crawler tractor with the crimper roller. So the tracks are 450 wide, so they are pressing down 5 tons worth of tractor. Crimper roller is 600 kilos, and it's running at 3 meters wide, so you can sort of see little striping effects. This picture is August 2024 is the main picture, so that is a month afterwards, I think. And then the inset picture is from November, and you can see the fairly obvious difference of me, where I've been, where I've not been. Pictures tell 1,000 words, so I don't need to bother speaking about it. Next picture shows you the machines. So what I did in 2024, later on, once I'd already done that, was I had a notion that maybe it didn't have enough weight, and I wanted to understand if adding more weight helped. So those two red weights that you see are 375 kilos each. They're wheel weights from a tractor. Chucked them on, so now I've essentially doubled the weight of it. And I went out and did some other bits on the farm that I've not taken pictures of, but I kept it on like that and parked it up over winter. And the main picture just shows you the machine, which is a kind of zombie apocalypse weapon, to be honest. But if you're in an area that I'm in and you've got hundreds of acres of problems to deal with, the idea is on the front you can just walk straight through a gorse bush and it won't notice, and at the back you can roll bracken or roll the gorse bush and you just obliterate everything. So it's a bit noisy, a bit rattly, but it's quite good fun, to be honest. So the next picture is, I think, when we start in the trial. So on the left of the screen, this is before I've got started with rolling, with starting crimping. This is June. Now you can see that it just looks like it's quite a lot of bracken come back, but actually what you're looking at is a great deal of grasses, and you can see the grasses have come up and started to head, which is really nice because you don't normally get that in 4-foot bracken. We're now talking about grasses that are coming up to the height of bracken at kind of 2 feet, and that's really only after one poor press with the wrong machine, one with a rubber tire tractor, and now one with a crawler tractor with a crimper on. So we then set out the trial, and the idea was to show the striking difference between when you run up and down, make a pass, and you don't make a pass. So I've done sort of 10 kind of stripy control, non-control areas side by side, because you get to do that with a machine rather than persuade a cattle beast to walk up and down in an area. So it makes for a more dramatic effect, but you can see the principle of it. So that's before it was crimped on in June, and we've got the second regrowth is exactly a month later. So majority of the bracken is still happy, growing, and strong biomass, and you can see regrowth, but it's not that bad. So again, you know where I've been. So next slide is so just different aspects, all from September. Yeah, these are all from, well, so the top left, we'll go with that one. This is September. You can see the area that's now been crimped 4 times is it's virtually eliminated. You can see the areas where I've not been just because I've missed my lines. It is grass. It is no longer a bracken paddock anymore. It is a grass paddock. So it looks like I've gone out there with Roundup, which I haven't. The picture to the right is the regrowth in September. So you can see the area to the left is pretty impressive. The area to the right, not so impressive. And if you look to the bottom left, that's even worse. So the bracken's regrown. And that now begs a bunch of questions, of which, did I overweight the crimper roller? And in over crimping, I've severed the frond from the rhizome. And according to Robin at the Hutton, that's the thing that stimulates the regrowth. And this area is a bit boggy, and I just wonder that in a wet area, too much weight, it's all of it. It's just as if I've been in there and I've cut it. So that's quite interesting. But counter to that is the picture to the bottom right, which is doing that a month later. Instead of June, I did it in July. And I went down this pretty steep bit of hill, and it's absolutely wiped the stuff out. It can't even regrow. And that's in September, so that's a month or two after I did it in July. And that's even baffling as well, in the same way that we've got so many questions that don't have answers, but at least they're really interesting questions to ask. So the last slide is the one that I took on Sunday with some nice low winter sun. So you can see the trial site that was laid out. You can see the nice stripes. You can see the strength of the grasses coming through. And if that were the entire hill, I think we could all agree you could put 100 head of cattle on that, and they'd be pretty comfortable. And the bit to the left was the bit, as mentioned, the July crimp, that seemed to be infinitely more effective and just came up with nothing but grasses. No regrowth. Maybe the ground was a bit harder, it still had the weights on it. So there's so many permutations to try and get this more accurate, that this trial could go on for a while until we get it just right, but we're definitely onto something. So last kind of thing I want to mention is future research for me to take this forward. If anybody is on this call that's got some deep pockets, that would be pretty handy, because the next obvious thing from an engineering point of view is to build a contour crimper roller that, instead of it being 3 meters wide, it has individual 1 meter sections, and they can all move independent on the ground. So when you go over a rock and when you go over some undulating ground, you still have a bit of a press on the rest of the machine to help effectiveness. That'd be kind of handy. These things, this guy that builds one down in England is talking about 20-ish grand. I've already spent all my money on my test machinery there. You're looking at sort of 40, 50, 60K there. So it would be nice if there was some extra funding, because the principle of all this is to support planting trees. And the other thing would be really interesting is to take what the rest of the guys are doing with livestock, doing a hectare of this ground, doing one pass with the crimper, and then come May, when the fronds are beginning to grow and the grass is beginning to grow, put a set amount of livestock into a set area, and they will have grass to munch, and they will both inadvertently munch the fronds as well as trampling the bracken. So I just need a bit of cash to do some fencing, and I need a wee bit of leeway from the Scottish Forestry to cordon off areas of ground that have bracken on them, so that we can have a look to see what it's going to do. So that's the basis of it. What we're trying to do here is we are trying to never fight nature. If you use as a lux, all you're doing is assuming that man is superior in his attempts to control the environment. Don't control the environment. Try and understand, try and observe, and try and see what we can do. And that leads on to the idea that if we just try and kill this bracken, all we'll end up with is the bracken coming back. This has to be in combination with planting trees, because bracken is not shade tolerant. This is just a nice pretty picture. I think this was about September of this year. So the majority of it's after a single pass, and you can see the main section sort of toward the middle to the right is the bit that's been done 4 times, and then you can see the bit in July that's been done just once, but it's a total wipeout of everything that's there.
Thanks, Dermot. Sorry, I think this has maybe gone a little bit sticky just with the internet.
You also get an idea of the size of the hill and the size of the problem I've got to deal with. But we are hoping that we could maybe do 5 hectares a day with this machine. So in good going terrain where you don't have a great deal of rocks, if you've got rocks, it's not going to work. But it's instead of going cutting. If you go cutting, you're going to damage your machine unless you're very confident in the area. I have no confidence of this area. There are rocks, but at least I don't damage the machine when I bump into them.
Thanks, Dermot. And one of the things that Dermot's highlighted there that's incredibly important is that there is a certain amount of horses for courses on this, that particularly if you're looking at a site where is going to be viable for planting trees, if the bracken's out the way sort of thing, then you need to make sure that you're doing that follow-up management. So there's no point just doing any of these things and then not doing the next stage. But in some of these cases, when we're just looking at grazing ground and we're looking at the kind of the control, the stopping the spread and stuff, if that ongoing management is the usual management of our livestock, then it fits in quite nicely. this sort of thing, as you can tell, is a bit more of an investment. There's more man hours maybe potentially in terms of actually the clearance, but you need to know what that next step is going to be, because even if we do the crimper is absolutely perfect and it's gone exactly how we want to, if we then just leave the site and we don't graze it or we don't put trees on it to shade it out, the bracken is just going to come back. And I think it's something that I probably didn't really introduce at the top of the thing, but has been mentioned by both speakers, is that until 2023, we had the option of Azulox. Now, not everybody wants to use chemicals anyway, but as a chemical, it was specific and it was effective. So there was a lot of other things that just didn't get explored. Without that, there is a chemical option still, but it's very non-specific. And there's a lot of worries about kind of various problems with using it. And it's not as effective as the previous version was. So even if you were going to start, and I know people have talked about it, that it's maybe we don't have a silver bullet anymore, that maybe a combination of different management methods, depending on your goals, is going to be the best option. And it's about time, it's about what you want your outcomes to be in terms of what you want the ground to be used for, and it's about what you've got available to you as well and what you're comfortable using. So there is no sadly there is no kind of one answer to this, but it's trying to work out all of the options that are available to us. So I'll just go on to, or let me onto the next slide, which I just wanted to pop in as a highlight. So none of this work could happen if we didn't have farmers like Diarmid and like Fiona that were willing to participate, that were keen, that had the ideas, that were wanting to deliver some kind of information and knowledge exchange on these topics. So this picture here is from the training day from the Livestock field lab. But we've got, as I mentioned at the beginning, hundreds and hundreds of farmers that have brought these trials to life that we really couldn't kind of manage without. So I am going to whiz through my last couple of slides, I think, looking at the time. And then if we've got time for a few more questions, we will do them. So my last couple of slides are just about learning networks. So the next step is that we've got funding so we can expand bracken management as a topic. Now that includes additional research. So I think I've looked back through some of the questions. A lot of those questions were about a number that Fiona quoted that didn't sound quite right. So, but I think it linked to a lot of questions that we've had about that kind of pressure that's needed to have the impact as well as the timing and stuff. And as you can see, so these are the votes so far on the survey we've got about the network. And a lot of people want to expand that research on the grazing trampling impact. There is obviously a lot of interest in various mechanical methods and stuff as well. So one of the things I'm asking of you today, for kind of, if you're interested in this topic, if you want to continue being part of it, is to please sign up for the Learning Network. And if you can, do complete the short survey. It is a short survey, and this is one of the questions that I'm getting you to answer, is what do you want that next bit of research to look like? The other huge part of the Learning Network, particularly for myself, when we've started doing this bracken work, I've had lots of conversations with lots of different organisations across the UK that are doing bits and bobs, but we're not all talking about it. We haven't got a space to all talk about it. So that's one of the things that I want to create. There's opportunities for relationships there that maybe match farmers and bits of ground that need grazing at certain times of year. There's maybe kind of just lots of knowledge sharing, lots of community and lots of discussions available, farm visits and stuff as well. So this question that the bar chart is for was, how would you like the delivery of the Learning Network to look? And as you can see, particularly for this topic, actual technical resources is so important, and that links back to that research aspect and is something that we're very keen to deliver, that people can be confident with the knowledge that they know that they're doing something safely and effectively. But also there is that farm walk aspect and stuff, and the meeting other people and chatting to other people and things as well. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a feel. Like, we have launched the network, but it is very much what is needed by the industry. So it's farmers, land managers, advisors, and it is right across the UK. So whether you're Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland, like please do get involved or share it with people that maybe haven't heard about it. We'll send the link round afterwards as well, but this is a QR code. But I promise it is a short survey and the network sign up. You don't have to answer all of the questions anyway, so if you just want to skip through and sign up to be part of it, then that is acceptable. But this is obviously the opportunity for you to say what you want to see. So I will stop sharing for now and just see if I've got a couple of minutes, 1 minute. So Fiona and Emmett, can I please ask you to just pop your cameras back on, and then I'll just have a quick look at what some of the questions were. So Fiona, the first one that I'm going to chuck over to you was when you were talking about mechanical methods. What have you been doing on farm?
Yeah, just pasture topping. It's not easy to get anything in because the ground's so uneven. So where the cattle have made out pathways and we can see where we're going, then we just go in with a pasture topper on the back of a tractor.
Okay, so it is with a tractor and stuff as well. Because I remember you mentioning you were doing some hand strumming and stuff at one point as well.
Yeah, we have done a bit of that, mainly along the boundary edges, because we're trying to stop the brackens going under the wall and into our neighbouring farmers, because they don't want the brackens and they're more likely to spray them. So we're just trying to make make a buffer zone along the edge of our land. Yeah,
that's great. And actually that links into one of the questions that I can see in front of me here is about managing bracken for conservation, but also the visibility of historic features and stuff. And I know it's something that I have been part of the Farming Protected Landscape panel in Northumberland National Park and stuff, and it was one of the big things that came up in terms of bracken from that way, because the nature of the rhizomes and stuff, if they get down through archaeology and things, they have got the potential to cause quite a lot of damage. So it is one of the areas that that management's really interesting, but I think particularly that might end up being that it's often that more nuanced kind of hand mechanical methods. But that's great. What have we got? There's a question about, I think Diarmid, you've touched on this, so I think we'll make this our last question for now. Anything that we haven't covered, I will have a look through these questions and we'll try and include some of the answers in the follow-up email for everybody. But like I say, a lot of it is to be discussed going forward. So please do sign up for that learning network. But last question, Diarmid, the difference between the cutting and this question specifically is about removing the arisings or not, whether like leaving, if there's a difference there in leaving stuff and moving it off. But I suppose obviously with your crimper, the intention is not to cut through it, but
yeah, this is about efficiency of time and covering as much land as you can. If you go in here with a mower, the mower would detonate because it's going to hit some rocks. I'm not going to go in there then with a mower and a forage harvester and try and retrieve all the bracken, which would be excellent for compost, but it's not practical. So I'm trying to come up with a relatively simplistic system in order to deal with it.
But actually, as you mentioned there, like the stuff that had been crimped, actually the litter disappeared quite a lot over the winter, and there was a lot of grass coming through. So whether that
seems to grow through it, yeah.
That bruising, whether that kind of speeds up that decomposition, or even it drying out and then blowing away and stuff, there's possibilities there.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of questions. We will have a little look through it. As I say, a lot of them are still to be discussed in the future, how we can approach it. For now, thank you so much for everybody attended. Thank you very much to Fiona and Diarmid for taking the time out and for speaking to everybody today. And please do follow up with emails. There is a Bracken Management at soilassociation.org email address. And of course, there is the Learning Network. So thank you all, and we'll finish it there.